Welcome to The Long Road. I'm your host, Chris Roberts, and I hope to have a guest pretty soon, but if they don't have, he or she doesn't show up, we'll continue on, Plan B and Plan C. It was strange this weekend for example, Paul Ryan was asked to explain the proposal to help reduce the deficit, and he said it was too long and it would take too long to explain it to the people, and they didn't have enough time to explain it to the people. And it just so happens today in USA Today's, on the front page, big article is Ross Perot, the United States is heading for disaster. And to be upfront, I was one of the founding members of Ross Perot's party, and I voted for Ross Perot twice because I thought it was really important. People talk about equality, they talk about civil rights, they talk about saving the environment, talk about improving schools, they talk about a whole bunch of stuff that is extremely important. But if you have no money, if you go bankrupt, all they are is hopes and dreams. You got to have the resources to make your dreams into reality. And Ross Perot was basically saying is, we got to make sure we save ourselves so we and our children and our grandchildren can have the opportunity to change their dreams into reality. And it goes, in 1992, when Ross Perot ran for president, the national debt was $4 trillion. That was 20 years ago. Today, the national debt is $16 trillion. And because we have to pay interest on top of interest on top of interest, just think, 20 years from now, we could very easily, quote, have a $40 trillion debt. And people will tell you, no, we're not going to have $40 trillion debt. In all intents and purposes, yeah, they're right, because China, Japan, South Korea, Indonesia, Germany are not going to allow us to get in debt that much. They're going to cause us day of reckoning, and they're going to make us pay an awful lot for the bonds that they buy off us. So which means our interest rates go up, everything goes up, and so the government may not doing the right cuts to get the debt under control, but instead you and I and everyone else will have to be paying more. In 1992, our debt was 64 cents of every dollar that we made. 64 cents out of every dollar. Right now, in 2012, our debt is $103, $1.03 for every dollar that we make. So basically, even if we paid every single dollar that we made on our debt, we still go deeper in our debt by 3 cents for every single dollar that we make. So right now, we can't get out of debt. We're just going to constantly make it worse because, plain and simple, you have to spend money on other stuff. You have to spend money on to live. You have to spend money to operate the government. So the government is not going to pay every dollar that it raises to pay off on the debt. The national debt, $4 trillion and rising, when he sounded the fiscal alarm by challenging President George H.W. Bush and Bill Clinton, stands at $16 trillion. The annual deficit, a record $290 billion then, has topped $1 trillion 4 years running. The budget year, the fiscal year ended yesterday. We could have a deficit about 1.4 to 1.5 trillion. And we were all up in arms in 1992 and we were looking at a $300 billion debt. Boy, it would be so nice to have a $300 billion debt. Doesn't it seem really weird to say it would be nice to only have a $300 billion debt? Well, If we had a $300 billion debt for the last 4 years, we would only have a $12 trillion debt instead of 16 trillion. As was the case a generation ago, budget experts agree that neither major party candidate for president has a credible plan to balance the budget. President Obama wants more government spending to help create jobs. The centerpiece of Republican nominee Mitt Romney is $5 trillion in tax cuts. So here's one. On one side, Obama says we need to grow government so government can spend more, so government can create more jobs. But where does the money come from? I don't have the money. Most of us don't have the money. If we take all the money that every millionaire and billionaire has, we're going to be pretty tough. It's going to be pretty hard for us even to cover the deficit in 1 year. That's $1.6 trillion. So if we take all their money, do 100% tax, like people say, go back to the days when it was 90%, or go like France wants to go 75%. You do it, that's a one-time windfall. You take all their money, you pay it, then what happens in year 2014? Mitt Romney cut $5 trillion in taxes. If you cut $5 trillion, wait a minute. If I'm $1.5 trillion in debt right now, the last thing I want to do is cut my income. If I cut my income without cutting spending, that means I go deeper into debt. And that's the way it goes. That's simple math. Any person in first grade student will say, hey, that's what's going to happen. And so, again, the experts are saying is neither side has the right plan or really any legitimate plan to solve the problem. So when the country may be in even greater need of another Ross Perot, the 82-year-old Texas billionaire is reemerging ever so slightly from self-imposed exile. He says, Perot is peddling one more cure for what he calls the nation's economic cancer. I didn't get done what I hoped I would get done in 1992, he said. Whether I got elected or not, I hope that we all got busy and straightened it out. That hasn't happened. And this is my last big effort. Ross Perot in 1992 told us, the American people, we had serious problems with the debt. And it wasn't going to get better. The more that we kept going deeper and deeper and deeper into debt, the more that we would lose control of what we're going to do day to day. And so his 19% of the people voted for Ross Perot. And this is after he dropped out and then came back in. 19% of the American people, 1 out of every 5 voters, listened to Ross Perot and says, yes, this man is right. The Democrats and the Republicans made fun of him with his big, long, goofy ears, his big nose, this little short guy. And it's going, nope, nope, nope. He doesn't know what he's talking about. Bang, bang, bang. He's just a millionaire that's just going along with the flow. But when he took the info commercial out, that 30-minute ad, and he had his charts, and he went there and what I call it Forrest Gump. You know what? Keep it simple, stupid. Don't insult people's intelligence. Don't use big words. Just communicate with the people. And he laid out those charts explaining to the country the situation that we were in. The people understood it. Over 20% of the people, about 20% of the people who voted understood what Mr. Perot was saying. Yes, there was other people, both Democrats and Republicans, says, now I'm a Democrat and Republican. I agree completely what Mr. Perot is saying. He can't win, so I'm not going to vote for him because I have to vote Democrat. I have to vote Republican. And it just didn't happen. So we went along. And Perot is an equal opportunity critic. unimpressed with both Obama and Romney when it comes to addressing the nation's red ink. We're on the edge of the cliff, and we have got to stop fixing it now. Otherwise, we are leaving a disaster to our children and our great-grandchildren's future. No one that's running really talks about it, about what we have to do and why we have to do it. They would prefer not to have it discussed. Again, we've done it. We've kicked the can down the road, farther and farther down the road. I was listening to TV this morning. What they were saying is Congress and the president are going to get together, and what they're going to say, even if President Romney gets elected, what we'll do is they'll come up with some plan. There'll be no sequester. The tax cuts will be extended. Everything will be extended for 6 months while they work up a plan. So if you push it for 6 months, working up a plan, well, in 6 months, we're going to put $700 billion on a credit card. Ross Perot in 1992 was worrying about $290 billion. We're talking about putting $700 to $800 billion extra by kicking the can down the road. To me, it's a total lack of leadership saying, hey, you know what? If I tell the people what we have to do, if I take time to explain the plan, or if I take time to explain what tax, tax loopholes or tax breaks that we're going to do without, what's functions of government we're going to do without, what's government services that we're going to reduce, or what taxes are we going to reduce, or which taxes we're going to increase, and we go and say, well, you know what, doesn't fit in the soundbite. The American people are not capable of sitting down and spending more than 35, 40 seconds listening to us. They really don't want to know. We'll tell them after. You don't go to a doctor and say, Doc, I'm sick, and the doc says, here, sign this piece of paper, and when I get into, after we go into surgery, after you hire me as your doctor, we'll go into surgery, and then when you're just about under, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. You wouldn't do that. If someone, same way with a plumber or electrician, don't worry, I'm going to fix it. I will go and tell you what I'm going to do after I've tore out your sink, or if I've taken all your sheetrock down. I'm going, yep, now this is what I'm going to do, and this is what it's going to cost you, and this is what's going to happen. Now, we as American people really like to know what's going to happen prior to that. And so, he goes right here. For example, 1992, 20 years ago, the annual federal budget was $1.4 trillion. 2012, the annual budget is $3.8 trillion. It's almost tripled in size in 20 years. And that's under Democrat and Republican. To go and say the Democrats grow government, the Republicans shrink government, back and forth, both of them are providing misinformation, because how do you go from 1.4 trillion to 3.8 trillion in 20 years? It doesn't happen unless both sides are pretty complicit in it. In 1992, the Department of Defense had budget was $303 billion. In 2012, the Department of Defense budget is $709 billion. And let's see, in 1992, the USSR fell apart. The Berlin Wall was down. Saddam Hussein was defeated in the Gulf War. And so China was on its way to becoming more capitalistic, still communist, but more capitalistic, and getting into the world market. The United States was the world's last superpower. Russia was on a decline. Europe militaries were on a decline. And so in 20 years later, that's $709 billion. So compared to 1992, when we had more troops, more airplanes, more ships, more tanks, and we had a greater enemy in 1992, now today, $709 billion. It's just 1 year. So comparatives. So how much safer are we in 2012 with a $709 billion budget compared to 1992 with a $303 billion budget? Our embassy still gets attacked in Libya, plain and simple. We just had more servicemen get killed in Afghanistan yesterday with a friendly on friendly fire. It was a miscommunication. But how do you go and with that extra money, we've learned from the first Gulf War, there's ways to communicate so people don't die from miscommunication. And so the question is, what are we getting our money's worth for? $709 billion for 1 year, Department of Defense, compared to 303 in 1992. Social Security in 1992 cost us $285 billion. Social Security cost us $773 billion in 2012. And there's 10,000 baby boomers every single day retiring. And so basically Social Security, it's going up. It's quite easily possible that within the next 10 years, Social Security be a $1 trillion budget item. So healthcare programs, in 1992, they were $237 billion. Healthcare programs right now, in 2012, $953 billion. And so if I add it up, defense rounded off at 700,000, Social Security 750,000, that's 1.5450, and another 9.5. So in 2012, defense, Social Security, and the health programs, that is $2.4 trillion. And the federal government, with all fees and everything, will bring in $2.5 trillion in 2012. So we don't have any money. And this was Ross Perot tried to go and tell us in 1992. In 1992, that was 590, 800, okay, 830. So the difference between, so it's 0.8. So basically 1992, under what Ross Perot was saying, raising the red flag, was the United States government spent $800 billion on defense, Social Security, and health programs. But it raised $1.4 trillion in taxes and fees. So we still had $600 billion left to spend on other items: education, safety, farm bill, transportation, you name it. So look at the difference. $800 billion in expense, the three big expenses, $600 billion left over, and then we had to use $300 billion, we had a debt. Well, in 2012, we're looking at $2.5 trillion for the big three, which is they've tripled in 20 years, and we have $100 billion left for everything else in the country. And so when Ross Perot comes and says neither Romney or Obama is addressing the problem, is they don't want to address the problem, because if they address the problem, we're going to go crazy. We're going to go and say, wait a minute, what is wrong here? Romney wants to increase the size of defense. If he increases the size of defense the way he wants, that means the big three will take every single penny in taxes and fees that comes into the federal government, and anything else that the federal government does will be on the credit card. if we cut taxes will automatically increase the deficit. And so, Mr. Perot was saying is, we have a serious problem. We had a serious problem in 1992, and it's really getting much worse. And again, if we're having a debate, maybe Mr. Bush, not Bush, looking at the wrong picture. Maybe Mr. Romney and Mr. Obama should take out the clipboard and explain to us, the American people, how they plan on solving the debt problem. Cutting deficits, one says, I'm going to cut deficit by $4 trillion over the next 4 years. That's projected growth. That's not cutting anything. Here he goes and says, David Walker, the former U.S. Comptroller General, a lot of people have heard of him and saying we have the problem. He says, there's no question we are worse today than we were in 1992. He has compiled a slideshow of charts and graphic details, detailing the growth of federal spending deficits and boom, fueled by retiring baby boomers, soaring health care costs, and more than $1 trillion a year in tax breaks. We all want tax breaks. We want a tax break if we go to school. We want a tax break if we have a mortgage. We want a tax break if we do solar. We want to have a tax break if we buy a green automobile. We want a tax break if we put new energy efficient windows. We want a tax break if we want to drill for oil. We want a tax break if we want to put windmills up. Everybody wants tax breaks. And so we put a little tax break here and a little tax break there. And to go and say right now, the federal government gives $1 trillion a year in tax breaks. So if the projected deficit for 2012 was $1.3 trillion and we have $1 trillion in tax breaks, if they did away with all the tax breaks, bingo, a deficit would have been $300 billion, basically what it was in 1992. But as you can see, the number of tax breaks each year keeps on growing more and more and more. It's one of those, if I go build a house right next to on North Carolina Outer Banks, hurricane comes in, wipes it out, I get some breaks, the federal government helps me, we build up the house again, gets wiped out, the federal government does it again and again and again. How many times do you go and say, nope, it's not the federal government's responsibility to help us, to help you do something stupid? That's one of the things tax breaks can do. Tax breaks can help people do things stupid and then have their fellow taxpayers pay off. It was like a couple weeks ago when we talked about GE. GE paid no taxes at all. It got a tax refund. And I think I gave a list of like 10 companies that made billions of dollars in profits, but they all got tax refunds. They didn't pay a single penny in tax. They were able to use the tax breaks. A perfect example of a tax break is the new courthouse. Excuse me. One of the individuals is going to come up with $5 million, and he's going to buy new market tax credits. That individual or corporation will put $5 million to help pay and build the courthouse. And in turn, that individual organization will get a 39% tax break. So basically, if I had $5 million and I came and said, hey, here's $5 million, I'll help finance the building of the courthouse. And when I go sell the building, not only do I get my $5 million back that I invested in the building, I also, over a 7-year period, get $1.9 million in a tax credit. Not a deduction, a tax credit. So if I have another company over here that I owe $1.9 million in taxes, I just go and take this tax credit and put it over here, and I don't have to pay any taxes at all. That's how GE and the other big corporations use these tax breaks. Are they illegal? No, they're not illegal. They're all legal. They're legal ways to get around the system. And Ross Perot knew it, and Ross Perot tried to put an end to it. It says, you're talking about Ross Perot beamed as he was called the king of charts and graph, a reference to his innovative TV ads in 1992. He was clear, concise, and compelling. We haven't had that in a long time. What we've got to, we have to have that in 2013. To hear them tell it, his on and off again campaign, relaunched on October 1st of that year, helped produce the 1993 Deficit Reduction Agreement, the 1994 Republican Revolution that transformed Congress, and 4 years later of use a budget surplus. So 1992, people, like I said earlier, people made fun of Ross Perot, his ears, his charts, but 20% of the voters scared the hell out of the Democrats, and they scared the hell out of the Republicans. They went and said, a lot of the Republicans says that Ross Perot cost George Bush Sr. his re-election. No, I think what cost George Bush's re-election was no one was being honest with the American people except Ross Perot. And because they were being, he scared them, that's how we got the Gramm-Rudman Act, Gramm-Rudman-Hollins budget act. Basically, if Congress wanted to spend a million, create a new $1 million program, they had to come up with $1 million in additional revenue, or they had to cut $1 million someplace else, or they had to cut and add so they'd come up. Congress was never allowed to come up with a new program unless it was funded. Congress had to make the hard decisions. And up until about, I think when Bush Jr. was in the White House, that was in effect, and both of the parties allowed it to run out. And once it ran out, there was no one to keep the children in Congress in line. There was no one that says, hey, this is what the law says, this is what you got to do. And since that laws ran out, the deficits are going through the roof. And so it's what's happened. At the time, Perot's plan called for raising taxes on income, gasoline, Social Security benefits. He wanted to cut defense by $40 billion more than Bush sought after 5 years, and slash Medicare by twice that amount. Ne'er a sacred cow was spared, particularly not the wealthy, who he said should pay more and get back less. There it was in 1992, Ross Perot, and before you jump on Ross Perot as being anti-war, Ross Perot was a naval officer on a nuclear submarine, in the nuclear submarine force, personally selected by Admiral Rickover, the father of nuclear navy, because he handpicked the individuals. Ross Perot was highly intelligent. Ross Perot got out of the military, went into computers, made millions on doing his work. And he understood, and he made millions selling stuff to the Defense Department. But he also knew where the Defense Department was bloated. He also knew with the fall of Russia, the USSR, and other ones, that we could afford to cut more out. And he said, yes, I make a lot of money. There's an awful lot of multi-millionaires that make a lot of money. We can afford to pay more. Do we deserve to have Social Security? Yes, Social Security? Yes. Ross Perot is still a multi-millionaire, but he still gets to collect his Social Security check. President Bush Sr. gets to collect the Social Security check. Jimmy Carter collects the Social Security check. There's an awful lot of people, both in the Tea Party, conservatives, Democrats, who are extremely wealthy, who are complaining about the government, but they still have no problem having that Social Security check direct deposit into their bank every month. They still have no problem using Medicaid every month. And so some of it's kind of being hypocritical. Medicaid, Medicare, the problem with Medicare is we see it over and over again, the fraud that's in Medicare. And I think I talked before, 3 years ago when my mother passed, she had suffered her second major stroke, and she was in a nursing home. And the doctor came in and he says, well, we can do this surgery on her. We'll do this brain surgery because we think her stroke is right in the middle. And we asked the doctor, what's the prognosis? He says 50-50 that should live. And what's the worst case? And it says, well, the best case was she's going to have to be on a breathing apparatus, and she was going to be on a feeding tube. I go, what? And then other doctor came in and says, yeah, we can put the feeding tube in right now. And and we were going in. My mother was in really bad shape, but it was kind of like, it was viewing that she was a cash cow. This surgery, expensive surgery, could have been done, would give her no quality of life. The feeding tube could have put in another expensive thing, no quality of life. There would be no guarantee that she'd be alive 3 to 6 months after that. And so that would have cost an awful lot of money. And I think myself and my siblings, I think we did the right thing, the compassionate thing, and we let my mother go on her own terms. Some of that stuff, a lot of that stuff happens. You've got people on wheelchairs. You just see how much fraud that goes on. And because it's fraud, it's having such a negative effect on Social Security. Ross Perot not Social Security, Medicare. Ross Perot wanted to tighten up some of the stuff so it could help save Medicaid. He also saying is at 1.35%, like we talked about 2 weeks ago, you can't fund Social Security on 1.35% of everyone's income. And so that's some of the stuff that's happened. And like he's going right now, our president blames Congress. Congress blames the president. The Democrats and Republicans blame each other. No one steps up to the plate and accepts responsibility for anything, Perot says. It's like the guy who's drinking. Sooner or later, he's got to put a cork on the bottle. Right, Perot says? You have to have the will to do it. And needless to say, listening to the political ads and stuff, I don't think either party has the will to do it. Nor is he swayed by polls showing that Americans less concerned about deficit and debt than the economy and jobs. Only 4% rated it the most important issue in recent CBS News/New York Times poll. 4%? Well, I talk to a lot of people, and a lot of people are really concerned. They're concerned about their self, their future. They look at the debt. They look at what the Fed's doing. They're looking at their retirement, and they realize they can't get any money on their CDs. They're not getting very much money on their 401ks. They're not getting very much money on their IRAs because we're in such debt, and they're printing so much money that there's no return. And so when people are saying you're going to have to work until 70, 75 to go and say, I have no worry about the debt, it's such a small problem. It's much more than a small problem. It says, if I told you I don't want to dig out of my debt problem until I go broke, you'll say, what are you talking about? You're not going to pay your debt if you don't have the money. Plain and simple. Yeah. You're going to go in and say, hey, I'm not going to pay my debt until I go broke. Like he's saying, if I'm broke, I have no money. And if I have no money, how can I pay my debt? Okay. Code word in politics is if you don't pay your debt until you go broke, that's called bankruptcy. Then you go to court and say, I can't pay my debt because I'm broke, so will you please wipe out the majority of my debt for me? And I don't know. To me I don't see how it's going to happen. you you got to pay your debt. We have to do certain things. We just have to make some tough decisions. Well, it looks like my guest isn't coming, so I've talked a little bit longer on Ross Perot than I was planning on doing, but you know, Ross Perot, he's still got the big ears. He's still got that smile, little small guy. But you know what? He was straightforward. He was honest. He told us what was happening. He told us what was going to happen if we didn't do anything. He scared the Republicans and the Democrats in doing some of the right things. Now we have to hopefully find someone that's going to stand up, other people that are going to scare the Democrats and the Republicans in doing the right thing. On last week, USA Today, we're talking about red state income swells. And they had a list. In a lot of states, for example, North Dakota, which is a Republican state, their state growth rate was 30.4%. That is really simple, is because they discovered oil and natural gas. South Dakota, 14.9, because, natural gas, oil, bingo, growth. DC is up 14%, yeah, because it's a political season and we have more and more people going to DC, quote unquote, these experts and these talking polls, or maybe call them talking stooges. They go down there and they get on all these shows and just seem to rotate through the shows, and they seem to be able to know what we think we should know, or they're able to tell us what we should do. And you know what? I'm pretty sure I'm like a lot of you. We want to be able to think for ourselves because we think we know what to think. But as I go down the the list, and I saw New Hampshire. New Hampshire was one of the, New Hampshire's growth was 0.5%, less than one half. Since 2007, New Hampshire has only grown 0.5%. And let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Only as far as growth, New Hampshire is 41st in growth over the past 5 years. The only places worse off than New Hampshire, New Jersey, Michigan, Idaho, California, Florida, Illinois, Arizona, Connecticut, and Nevada. And between New Jersey is negative 0.6, and Connecticut at 49 is negative 1.8, Nevada is negative 10.6. Again, here we are in, we got two people running for governor in New Hampshire, going back and forth, back and forth. No one's talking about the deficit problems that we have in New Hampshire. One side is saying, oh, we're going to cut taxes so we can create more jobs. Well, the majority of the jobs that are growing in New Hampshire are those service jobs. Licensed nurse practitioners, McDonald's, Walmart, food services, line cooks, jobs that pay $8 to $12 an hour, which ain't cutting anything. You're making $8 to $12 an hour in New Hampshire, you're hurting. Even if you're single, you're hurting. Try to live in Keene in a one-bedroom apartment on $8 to $12 an hour. The other one says we got to restore funding to the university system, and we got to restore funding to LCHIP. We got a whole bunch of other things that we have to restore funding to. I can easily say yes. I have no problem with restoring funding. But you know what? If we're going to be realistic, we're not going to increase taxes. So basically, if we got $2 billion, we got $2 billion. Shouldn't both people, Democrat and Republican, be telling us, yes, we only have $2 billion, and we've decided that in New Hampshire, paying money for supporting college education to reduce their costs is more important than providing health care for poor children. Say it. That's the thing. Because basically, if you get $2 billion, it's going to be a reshuffling of the money. And you reshuffle the money based on priorities. Don't go again, insult us and say, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this. Or I'm going to cut this, cut this, cut this. Because if you cut this, cut this, cut this, you don't bring in $2 billion. And if you add this, add this, add this, that's over and above the $2 billion. So what Ross Perot talked about the federal government in 1992, it's happening in New Hampshire. No one wants to talk about it. Plain and simple, yes, we had to make some drastic cuts to balance the budget in New Hampshire. And I don't think the cuts, I don't think the cuts were done in the right way. I thought the priority was wrong. I don't believe in cutting taxes for cigarettes. But this is 2007. And so, again, where the Democrats are blaming the Republicans and the Republicans blaming the Democrats. And to me, both the Democrats and the Republicans have had their time at the head of the ship. They've both had the opportunity to be the captain of the ship. And as captain of the ship, they haven't been doing a very good job. They've been worrying about themselves. To me, I don't know if I said it here before, but to me, if I'm on the Titanic and I've just hit the iceberg, I don't want a captain who's worrying about if I'm cold, I'm wet, I'm hungry. I want a captain that's going to get me either to Liverpool or to New York. He's going to get me there. He or she is going to get me there alive. You know what? I don't want to go on a ship and go to my death with false hope for a better tomorrow. I want someone who says, you know what? Yeah, I know it's cold. I know you don't have food, plain and simple. And I know you're wet. But my job is to get you back to New York, or back to Liverpool so you can live the rest of your life. You can go get a hot shower. You can put warm clothes on. You can go out and pig out at the first restaurant you see. That's what I expect from my leadership. That's what I expect from the captains of our political parties. That's what Ross Perot taught me when I was much younger, 20 years ago. And that's important. That's what I think our political leaders should be. They should be about saving us so we can run our own life, so we can have better control. Plain and simple. Like I says, we're in a situation that we're worrying about, oh, tomorrow is going to be a better day. Just trust me, just trust me. I will give you the plans tomorrow. Ross Perot laid out his plans, and a lot of people said he was an idiot. Well, I don't believe the American people are an idiot. Again, the president and Mr. Romney are not laying out their plans. Both people that are running for governor in the state of New Hampshire are not laying out their plans. And to me, if we're going to say the old term, history repeats itself, if no one lays out their plans, they're never going to have to defend the plans. And if I don't have to defend it, I don't have to stand up and give you my word that I'm telling you the truth and I'm going to defend the plans. I can guarantee you it ain't going to happen. It just isn't going to happen. And so that's plain and simple in the politics. And in the last few minutes, we'll wrap up one that was really hitting home, and it's hitting home to a lot of people. The Pew report shows increase in those with student debt and loans. Note the lowest income families have the highest debt to income ratio. That's a no-brainer, plain and simple. If I have $1 million and my daughters go to college and I still owe $200,000 in debt, that isn't very much on student loans. Nearly 1 in 5, 19% of all households in 2010 had outstanding student debt or loans in deferment, up from 15%. That's deferment, and more than double the number 2 decades ago. While increases in outstanding student debt are occurring across income levels and ages, the trend is taking the biggest bite out of the nation's youngest and poorest households. The survey conducted every 3 years found that the average total indebtedness between 2007 and 2010 for all households fell from 100,000 total indebtedness between all households fell to 100,000 from 105. Yet the Fed noted that the debt related to education has risen in the same age, in the same households. That was part of when they're talking about the economy isn't growing, the economy isn't growing. Well, the reason the economy isn't growing, so basically up until 2007, we were increasing our debt basically every year. 2008 hits, and not only people are not increasing their debt, they're paying down their debt. So basically you say, well, they've only paid down their debt $5,000. But if you go back to the trajectory, instead of having 105, the average household should have been about 120 to 125,000. Instead, now they're only 100,000. So what this shows is that basically the median household has spent $25,000 less over the past 5 years, paying down debt or not buying stuff. And because people have learned they got to do better. And American people are start doing better. So plain and simple, I suspect as in the future, this $100,000 per household is going to go down even lower. And as it goes lower, people are not buying because people now understand how important it is to pay off the debt. Plain and simple, the easiest way I want to make money, if I'm at Home Depot and they charge 25.99% interest, I pay off $100, I've just made myself 26 bucks. Hey, then if I'm making 10 bucks an hour, I'm saying, wait a minute, that's 3 hours I would have to work just to pay interest. So people are smartening up, and that's what they're doing. The cost of learning. In 1989, 9% of the households in the United States had student debt, and the average amount was $9,634. Yeah, 1977, when I graduated, I had $13,900 of student debt, which lucky I paid off. Now in 2010, 19% of the houses, basically 1 out of every 5 houses in the United States has debt, and it's almost $27,000. And the other part is, if I graduate from college and I have $27,000 in debt, I can't buy a house, I can't buy a new car, I may be able to buy an iPhone or something like that, or a PlayStation, but at $27,000, and if I got 10 years to pay it off, so basically I'm looking at about $250 per month just to pay off my student loans over 10 years. And if I'm got more than that, I could be easily looking at $300 to $400 a month just paying off for student loans. And just think, what happens if you're one of those 20 to 30% of the people that didn't get a job as a result of your college degree, and you're working at a job that basically people with high school diplomas would normally get. I know of an individual that's working, he's making 12 bucks an hour, recently graduated Keene State College. And we asked him, why is he working? He says, I have to work so I don't go in default of my student loans. So he's not working because of his education, he's working just so he doesn't go in default of his student loans. Sad commentary, and so basically Wednesday night will be the first of the debates, and based on what I've been reading here in other newspapers and stuff, I don't think we're going to hear very much in the debates. President is going to try to make sure he doesn't mess up. Mitt Romney is going to try to make sure he doesn't mess up, and he's going to try to see if he can gain some traction. And in the long haul, one of those individuals will be elected president. And as Ross Perot says, you, our children, and our grandchildren will pay the price. And so it's up to us. We got to ask. If we don't want to ask, we're going to get what we're going to get. And so, again, so we're just going to call them up, ask them. And so I'll be out there and I'll be asking questions. So hopefully you will be too. So I'll see you out there on the long road, and have a good day and get ready for the Pumpkin Fest. My bus went to...